This is Christy with MyScrapbookEvolution.com, and this video begins a wonderful collaborative project between myself and Jana of with2worlds.org. It's an art journaling collaboration, and we'll be sharing different hybrid art journal projects throughout 2017. Our first art journal project theme is mermaids, and I'll be working with this kit created by Jana herself. Specifically, I'm choosing to work with one of the brushes and a few of the die cuts. The first thing I'm doing is prepping my art journal page, and essentially my art journal is just an altered magazine. I've blown up one of the brushes from Jana's kit, and I am adhering it to the magazine page. Now I've just printed it on standard printer paper. You could print it on watercolor paper, and that's probably what I should have done considering I'm going to be using a lot of watercolor medium today, but plain printer paper is fine. One of the things I've noticed with the altered magazine is that I sometimes need to reinforce the pages a bit. So you see me putting the masking tape down across the seam, and now I just need to prep that masking tape with a little bit of gesso so that the paint and other mediums will stick to it a little better. I know a lot of people feel like they don't have time to art journal, or they don't feel like they have good drawing skills. And one of the ways to address that is to start off with something like this brush as a template for your design or a starting point. So the basis of my design is going to be this mermaid girl. And you can see that I have cut and print with my silhouette a few of the other images from the kit, and I'm just sort of going to lay them on the art journal page to get a feel for where I want to place those. That way, as I extend my design around, I kind of understand what I want to do with it. Once I have an idea of where I want to go, I'm going to start painting and drawing. So I'm giving her a bit of a face, and I've chosen watercolors in blue. For whatever reason, I had blue chosen when I created this brush, and I just decided to let that dictate my color palette, especially since it's a mermaid. She's going to have blue skin, blue hair. And now I'm just going to kind of flesh out or fill out the hair and give her a little bit of skin tone. I'm using watercolor crayons and a water brush. I love the way the watercolor crayons work. You get some very intense dark sections where you draw it in, and you can kind of pull the color out from dark to light. So it works really well for me when I'm working on the skin tones and with shading. I decided to make her outfit this sort of hot pink purple color because it kind of coordinates well with the blue tone. And I'm kind of going a little crazy with the hair, but that's okay. I can kind of work that in. The idea is that her hair is kind of flowing in the moving water. It's also important to note that there are gaps in time not shown in the video. You may need to stop and start with the medium, allowing it to dry during certain stages, especially when it comes to using acrylic paint, which I will be doing a little bit later on. So at this point, I'm just kind of drawing in with different shades of the watercolor crayon, wetting them, and then pulling that color down to fill her entire body. And I'm just going to keep layering that in, and then also working those same colors into her hair. Dark and light strands to give it more dimension. At this point, I'm not 100% happy with the way that I've done her hair, so I'm kind of extending it past the original brush that I printed from Jana's kit. I'm just trying to get it to feel full and to feel like it's flowing properly in a way that I like. Now, as I'm working, I realize that while I like the silhouette that I began with, it's not working well for me visually. I need to thin some of the lines from that brush. So I have a little bit of gesso designed for acrylic paint. I go ahead and paint her eyes in with white. That way I'll be able to add the detail to her eyes. And then I'm coming in around her body, and in different sections I'm just sort of painting over it a little bit and thinning out those thicker crayon-like lines that came with the brush. I will of course need to allow this to dry in between this and the next stage because I can't work on that wet gesso. And I've decided that I'm not 100% happy with her hair. I mentioned that before. So I'm kind of working the gesso into it, covering up different sections, adding a little bit of white, painting in some strands. It's giving a little bit more dimension to her hair, and it's allowing me to cover over the sections where I kind of overdid it with some of the other color. Remember, when you're creating, you go through different stages in which you like what you're doing, then you're not happy, and then you fix it and you sort of like it again. And this is what I'm going through. I'm just continuing to tweak the design until I get something I'm comfortable with. So now that everything has dried, I'm coming back in and I'm trying to add back in the shading that I had in her skin tone. I'm using a combination of watercolor, acrylic paint, and gouache. And gouache is a type of watercolor paint that has a little bit more coverage to it. And I mixed the gouache a little bit with the gesso so I can get some different shades. And you can just see me filling out her body, giving it the color and tone that I want it to have. And since I have the paint at the ready and I kind of want to use it up, I start with her eyes and then I'll begin with the detail of her lips. And this is actually where I really mess up. I should have probably used watercolor paper and I didn't. And what I'm doing starts to sort of eat away and rip at that printer paper. This is where you just need to be extra careful and let everything dry very well in between layers and try not to let it chew up the paper. I made a couple of attempts at trying to fix it, and eventually I'm just going to have to cover it up with a little bit of gesso, let it dry, and start over. And that's what gesso's for. It's for covering your mistakes and then fixing them and starting over. While the gesso on her lips dries, I'm going to go ahead and start working on the background on the other side of the art journal page. This is also good to do because I have a little bit of paint left over from creating with her. And I'm just going to use the paper that is left over from cutting out those die cuts. I'm using it as a stencil. I have some of the coral shapes and some of the fish shapes. I'm just sort of creating a silhouette of different items with the paint, kind of like these are off in the background. And that's my cat Little Bit. She likes to sit on the desk while I work. One of the reasons I like to work with non-toxic paint and products. So I'm just layering more of these coral shapes in. I'm going to put some of the coral die cuts over the top of them once these are dry. Kind of make it like an endless sea of coral is my goal. And now that the gesso is dried, I'm going to make a couple of different attempts to fix it. And I kind of mess things up once again. So, don't ever think that everything turns out perfect the first time. I am using Posca paint markers to add in some of the details. I love these because they flow pretty well and they're easy to use. They come with a very fine tip. I decide again that I'm not happy with her lips, and I make a couple of different attempts to fix it, and I'm going to have to go back and add a little more gesso. Once again, I end up with kind of a gray mess. So even though her lips aren't perfect, I can add in some of the details to her eyes and to the silhouette of her body. I used a white gel pen to add the detail to the center portion of her eyes. Just give it a little bit of highlight. And then here you see me painting over the lip area with the gesso, and this is the gray mess I was talking about. So now I'm attempting to fix the lip area with a baby wipe, and I end up kind of realizing that I can blend in some of the hair, some of the strands. So I'm using the baby wipe to do that. And I realized that part of the reason I'm not happy with the hair is that it cuts off at that center portion of the page. So I extend it past onto the other side of the layout, and I'm a lot more happy with it. And then I'm going to come back in with the gesso and the paintbrush, and I'm just going to add back in some of the strands and hopefully not get as carried away as I did before. A few less strands this time, but still with just as much dimension. So at this point you see me come back in with the white gesso over the lips. I needed the white there so that I could add back the pink color. What you didn't see is that I tried to kind of draw in the lips a little bit with pencil to sort of fix things. And I'm going to have to let this dry again in different stages. I'm sort of blending back in the skin color and trying to let the paint flatten out the area that ripped and let it sort of glue down to the page. And once it's dry, I'll be able to come back in and completely fix the lips. Unfortunately, some of my video did not properly record. So I don't have the section where you see me fix the lips, and I also don't have the section where I complete the background. All I did to complete the background was to use watercolor to fill in different portions of it. I used watercolor crayon, and then I used gel medium to stick down those die cuts. The goal with the die cuts and the background was to sort of provide a little bit of dimension. So I added the die cuts in layers over the section where I had used the stencil before with the coral, and then I added fish above her hair. So she's got fish that are sort of in the foreground, and then you can see the fish stencil being used as part of the background. I also used some of the die cuts to create a crown for her. Be sure to stop by Jana's blog, with2worlds.org, to see her take on the Dual Imaginations hybrid art journal with a mermaid theme. If you're curious about how I printed the die cuts and used them for this art journal page, I do have a tutorial for O Scraps. I will link to both Jana's page and the tutorial from O Scraps in the notes for this video.